Good evening, everybody. My name is Bert Dicht. I am the Managing Director of Membership for the National Space Society. And on behalf of my colleague, Larry Ahern, Vice President of Chapters, welcome to our Space Forum this evening, the Space Fair and Instabase. As always, thank you for joining us at these bi-weekly NSS Space Forums and also town halls. We appreciate your commitment to NSS and to space, so welcome back. In terms of our agenda this evening, I like to do a quick intro in terms of our virtual etiquette, a few NSS announcements. We'll talk about what's coming up next in terms of the space forums and town halls, and then we'll get right into the program. And then at the end, of course, we'll adjourn and wish everyone well. Always, in terms of virtual etiquette, it's best if you have a question to submit the question using the Q&A function. That goes directly to the panelists, but you are very welcome to submit a question using the chat. We only ask that you be respectful of the panelists, speakers, and the rest of the audience. We did get a lot of questions that were submitted as you registered. Those have been all passed on to our speaker this evening, and he is going to be trying to address as many as possible. But also feel free to, as I said, submit some questions along the way, and we'll be answering those at the end. And we do, on occasion, turn on the microphone if you'd like to ask a question live to our speaker. So just remember that. So we look forward to all of your questions. As always, if you find this program enjoyable and you are, obviously you support everything that we've been doing as a National Space Society, we just encourage you to make a donation to support us. I thank everybody who's made donations in the past, and I'll say a thank you in advance for anyone who makes an additional donations. I will be posting the link into the chat once we get started, so just look for that. And please complete the post-Space Forum Town Hall survey at the end. There's a link that'll take you right there. It only takes a few minutes to complete it. Once you exit the session, it is completely anonymous. And I can tell you it really does help us in terms of planning future events. What I'm doing now as we go through these sessions, I'm going to be profiling some different aspects of NSS. At our last session, I talked about the Ad Astra and also the ISDC, but I want to call your attention to our Ad Astra downlink e-newsletter. And our editor for this, Fred Becker, is on tonight. He, of course, does all of our tech support, and he works very hard to get the downlinks out. This is all sent through emails, so look through your emails and your inbox, and you'll see this electronic newsletter. We are moving to trying to do it once every week. It had been every 2 weeks. And we know there's so much information to share. The downlink is not meant as an Ad Astra replacement. It's meant as a kind of a continuum in between Ad Astras to keep you informed about what's happening in NSS. That means what's happening with our chapters, activities, events, people. There are book reviews. There are links to our blog. You're going to be seeing a survey pretty soon. There's also advertisements for some things that NSS is involved with that can connect you to other space organizations. So make sure you're taking a look at your inbox, open that up, and read the latest issue. If you want to go back and look at previous issues, you do need to log into inside.nss.org. I know many of you have already done that, have access to our membership portal. So make sure you're doing that. The next issue should be out pretty soon. And if you have ideas or suggestions for what we should be putting into Ad Astra downlink, please let us know. So I'm thank Fred in advance for all the work he does on Ad Astra downlink. So now let me talk about what's coming up next with our, oops, what happened there? Went a little too fast. There we go. What's coming up next in terms of our space forums and town halls. So next week, July 20th, 54th anniversary of Apollo 11, we are going to be holding a leadership town hall open house. And this is our senior leadership of the NSS. We have Anita Gale, who's our CEO, Isaac Arthur, our president, and Dale Scran, our COO. They'll be talking about what's happening in NSS, what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, what's the space landscape look like, that type of thing. And we will be taking all of your questions. So if you want to know what's going on and finding out a little bit more about the internal operation of NSS and where we're going as a space advocacy organization, this is your perfect opportunity to hear it directly from our senior leadership and ask your questions. So please join us next week on the 20th. We are also going to be presenting several NSS Excellence Awards. These go to our volunteers who are just doing a great job. We weren't able to present these at the ISDC, so we're presenting them over the the town hall, as I call it. And we're also going to remember Apollo 11. When we send out the meeting announcement, we're going to be asking you to just share with us your thoughts about Apollo 11, what it meant to you. Where were you at the time when Apollo 11 landed? If you weren't born at that time, we'd like to hear what Apollo and the Apollo program have meant to you from a historical and legacy perspective. So look for that. It's going to be a great session next week. We've had to do some adjustments with our upcoming schedule. Our August 3rd speaker from NASA actually got moved into a new position, and she's not going to be able to present on August 3rd. This was going to be a joint session with the Huntsville, Alabama L5 chapter of NSS. We're working with NASA right now to reschedule that for sometime in September. So look for that. So what's coming up in August? We've got August 10th, the Astronaut Scholars Panel. This is a group of amazing young people that received the astronaut scholarships from the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation. We're working with ASF now to help promote STEM. It's an amazing organization started by the original Mercury astronauts and Gus Grissom's widow to present scholarships to worthy students studying in STEM fields. And you will be dazzled by these individuals. Incredible. On the 17th, we've got Melody Yasher, who gave a great presentation at the ISDC on 3D printed habitats. And that actually ties in nicely with our speaker this evening on habitats on Moon and Mars. So look for that. And then we're working very, very hard on getting the September and October schedules going. We hope to reschedule that again, that August 3rd one, for sometime in September. And we have a whole list of potential speakers that we hope will take us through the end of the year. So we're working on that. So look for that as we move forward. So now it's my pleasure to introduce this program for this evening. And as you know, we're going to be talking about the Space Fair and Instabase. And our speaker this evening is Dr. Doug Plata. Doug is a physician in Redlands, California. He is also the founder and president of the Space Development Network. And it's a free-to-join organization of space advocates. And their goal there is to advance space development projects. So he'll be talking about some of those aspects this evening. Along with the Instabase, a full-scale Moon-Mars based mock-up that they have on display at Starship launches, and they've had it on display. We had it at the ISDC, and it was really, really impressive. So it's my pleasure now to introduce Doug Plata. Doug, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Bert. I do really appreciate that. Can you see me?
Yes, I can see you, and we're ready for you to share.
Excellent. Okay, let me jump right into my presentation. Well, let's see.
Eric, okay, we see all the slides.
Okay, and
get it into a slideshow. Yep.
Okay, good.
Perfect.
All right, yes. So yeah, this is covering two different topics, but I was really pleased to see a number of you, quite a number of you, send in some questions. And I can tell that as you read the downlink, you learned about the website developspace.info and actually sort of explored that. And so there was a lot of questions that are not really going to be addressed by my presentation here, but are addressing some of the things brought up in the website. And so I'll get to those at the end. And again, if you could just hold your questions to the end. And for those of you who submitted questions, I've systematically gone through and sort of organized what questions were submitted, and I'll do my best to answer as many of those as I can. So the Instabase and Space Fair. So this started in 2020, during the pandemic. The Moon Society actually sort of jumped on the ball and took advantage of this, of everybody going on to Zoom. I presented for the Lunar Development Conference 2020. It was a completely online sort of thing. And in that presentation, I presented about the need for a new type of analog base, an analog base that would be not so much exploration oriented as practically all of them are, but really development and even settlement oriented. I'll explain a little bit sort of the rationale behind that. But immediately after that presentation, the Space Development Network, we actually got started on making progress towards that goal, and starting with making a mock-up of our concept for an initial permanent base on the Moon and initial permanent base on Mars. The same thing. We are advocating that for the sake of writing the story for history, knowingly writing the story, that we should have an initial permanent base on the Moon, and very shortly after that, initial permanent base on Mars, and that this not be a really large and not be a small four-person, NASA astronaut permanent base, but it be really writing the story of history of when people sold their homes on Earth and began moving beyond Earth. And so our concept for an initial permanent base would be a fully inflatable base, which we call the Instabase. And you'll understand it better as I go through this presentation. So we took our concept and immediately started making a full-scale mock-up of our concept using sheet plastic, just with the money and the free labor, the free time that we had. So here in Southern California, we just ordered some plastic sheeting, black, white, and clear, and got the dimensions and started, drawing lines and cutting and using duct tape. So obviously, this is not something that's going to be launched to the Moon or Mars. It's just a mock-up, just to illustrate the concept for an inflatable base for an initial permanent crew of 8. And as we cut and taped it together, these modules, there's 10 different modules, and these modules are rather large, as you can see illustrated here. And we just kept working. It was actually over a period of about 18 months, which was far longer than we anticipated. But over the 18 months, we did go ahead and construct the full mock-up. And basically, this thing is so large, it fits within the footprint of the local high school gymnasium. It's that big, okay? And yet, surprisingly, if you roll it up tight, it can fit in a small trailer and becomes very portable. So this is something that, I'd sort of like to put out there, that what we displayed there at ISDC in Frisco, that is something that could be transported to a high school, could be transported anywhere in North America, honestly, and could be set up and displayed. Now, let me take a moment to explain the context, the paradigm of which our proposal for the Instabase is within. And the context is all about what's happening down there in Boca Chica. As I'm sure that you all know, SpaceX is really hard at work building the factory that will produce the fleet of starships. and they are working hard. There have been some delays, but it seems like they are really moving forward relatively quickly to try to get to a fully reusable, super heavy vehicle, actually larger and with greater capacity than even the Saturn V. And it's just, you know, my mind is constantly blown by what it is that they're going to be able to offer us. And I think this represents, honestly, a fulfillment of, you know, some of you who are older space advocates, you know, for most of your life, you've basically been waiting for this moment. And here we are, and we really have SpaceX to thank for that. So down there at Starbase, the key thing is they are not just building a Starship, but they are building a fleet, and they're developing the capability for rapidly reusing the Starship. And as I'm sure you all know, this is it's an understatement to call it a paradigm changer. This is a turning point in human history. This is at least as big as Christopher Columbus discovering the New World. Because it's on Starship, I believe, that humanity is actually going to begin to spread beyond Earth. And so this is incredibly historically significant. I do believe that refueling in low Earth orbit is not going to be that difficult to challenge. They might be able to succeed on the very first try, but certainly we know how it works. You just, if you fail the first time, you keep at it until you perfect it. And then in our understanding, probably we're going to have lunar cargo before we have a Mars cargo, although that's probably going to be separated by not more than 3 to 5 years, at least attempts at landing cargo on Mars in 2026 and 2029. So, you know, unfortunately, NASA just doesn't, and the decision makers in DC, they just are not, they think it's all about just a few government astronauts picking up rocks and you know, adding to the footnotes of history. But if there's a fleet of Starships that are able to deliver at least 100 tons of payload per Starship, we all need to change our understanding of what's possible. And this is what is the basis behind our plan for sustainable space development. So that's the context. So we imagine that starting with the Moon, and again, shortly thereafter with Mars, that we'll be able to deliver, and again, this is one of our proposed ideas, solar drapes. And by our calculations, a single 100-ton Starship payload could deliver these sort of very mass efficient approach to solar drapes starting at the South Pole of the Moon. And a 100 tons would deliver 5.1 megawatts, and that's taking into account all sorts of different types of inefficiencies. 5.1 megawatts, which gets you into being able to like do the agriculture life support for, I think it was 208 people, maybe it's 308, I'd have to look back. Single digit between 10 and 20 tons of propellant per day, that 5.1 megawatts could electrolyze, and the metals in the I think 13 or 18 tons. So it is a large amount of capability, almost industrial capability, just with a single Starship payload. And so we need to really think about how we can use this capability. Then in our scenario, which is the plan for sustainable space development at developspace.info, we describe the landing of dexterous telerobots that can, you know, swap out spare parts using quick release mechanisms and keep the operations going just by sending spare parts. An ice harvester that could work within the cryogenic temperatures if it's made out of aluminum and has some body heat for the electronics. Beaming power and harvesting ice, separating out the ice from the ice regolith at site, and then actually shooting the ice balls, standardized ice balls, up to be caught at the rim where they can be processed near one of these peaks of eternal light to distillation and electrolysis for propellant, and of course for use for water at an initial permanent base. And then this is really the thing that I'll be talking about here in this presentation, and that is The Space Development Network, we believe that really inflatable habitats are probably the best choice for the first quite a number of years. And that is because they are large volume, unlike aluminum cylinders, and also unlike 3D printing, they don't require so much time to set up. They don't require so much energy. You don't have to ship binder. All you do is you create these things on Earth out of the best materials, Kevlar, the 5 different layers, and you package it up, deliver it as payload, have telerobots wheel it out to a prepared, flat and compacted surface, and then against the, open a valve of liquefied air, against the vacuum, in an afternoon, this thing is constructed. We're not talking waiting months for a 3D printer that could break down. No, this thing is just set up just instantly, and that's why we call it the Instabase. And we believe that as the Starship fleet starts resulting in the development of expanding bases on the Moon and Mars, heading very quickly towards actual private settlement, we believe that this is going to be inspiring very much internationally and into the upcoming generation in particular. It's our belief that the sensation that occurred back there in the 60s and the 70s in the Apollo program, that the upcoming generation, that they're going to have, their Apollo moment. And we think that this is going to happen within 10 years from now, is our belief. After the habitat is set up and secured, sort of ground anchored down, then this is our proposal. Don't know that this is going to happen, but if we want to maximize the historic impact, then this would be the way to do it. And that is to have an initial permanent crew of about 8 people that are probably going to be Americans, funded through public-private partnership between NASA and SpaceX and other companies, to have people who basically sell their homes. They are workers for companies, so they're private individuals. They're not government astronauts, but they are doing a job on behalf of the government or on behalf of the future American base, and that is they are maintaining the telerobotic workforce, even expanding it. They are maintaining operations to harvest the ice. They are conducting demonstrations like ISRU demonstrations. They are doing some studies on the indoor centrifuge, and they are receiving more payloads with these very large specialty habs. Honestly, if you look at the mass per square area for the 5 inflatable layers, a 100-ton Starship payload could deliver an inflatable with a footprint of about an acre in a single payload. That is the capability when you're talking about Starship's capability and inflatables. So this could be, a very diverse sort of group of people who sell their houses on home, and they move off Earth indefinitely. And these people, by my definition, they become the first settlers because they are families in the form of couples. They sell their homes and they're moving off Earth indefinitely. This is very historic. And if they were selected with the #1 criteria being that each of them knows a different family of languages, like the Latin-based languages, one person knows those, then these 8 people could speak to about 80% of the world's population in a language that they could understand. And again, I think that this is the prize to be seized. If anybody's concerned about China, if we have a fleet of Starships, and if we choose to establish a permanent base first, we will seize that historic opportunity. And it's something that I think a free country like America should choose to seize. As these initial permanent crew are living and working on the Moon, I imagine we could be watching them every Monday night, and see an hour in which it's a variety show. We're seeing all sorts of different things, including living on the Moon, including performing arts. If we again select them well, there could be some sort of unique novel music being performed there, but also in 1/6 gravity, dance becomes an entirely new phenomenon where you are like, instead of stepping per beat, per measure, you're going off, and in the air, you're doing different moves before the next measure. And you're able to use all sorts of surfaces, not just the floor. So it'll be amazing to go ahead and watch these people if we choose to do it well. And then these people could begin to do some organic chemistry from the organics and the L-cross results. There's pretty substantial organics there. Metal, 1% of the highlands is unoxidized metals, ceramics and glass, and actually begin to demonstrate the production of parts, which would help reduce the shipping cost, obviously. And we would watch them as they, have game night, and they celebrate different things. And so this is different. This is people will be able to reach out to a much broader group of people and interested in space as we start living and bringing the arts and some of these other things, not just the standard government astronauts picking up more rocks. And then as this initial permanent cruise, they're receiving more of these cargo deliveries. They are preparing things for the next phase, which was, in my understanding, would be an American base or almost like the ISS sort of partner, sort of these Artemis Accord groups of countries. But as the flight rate goes up and the per seat price goes down with this fleet of starships, we're really talking about the opportunity for most all countries to be able to afford at least one seat on a mission of exploration. And so, good and well, and this is going to be a financial driver. I'm convinced of it, and that is countries want to see their own people exploring space. And so I think an international lunar exploration phase, followed shortly thereafter by an international Mars exploration phase, is going to be very popular. And I think countries are going to be willing to spend the money to be a part of that. And America can help lead the world as we expand as a planet, as humanity starts expanding beyond Earth. And all of these international astronauts going to the moon and Mars on Starship, I do believe that this not only leads to this exploration, rather thorough exploration of the moon and Mars, but would also transition to the building up of very large and very rapidly international lunar base and international Mars base, with these specialty hubs that are more focused on individual functions. And as I mentioned, in 2026 and 2027, I think it's reasonable. SpaceX is going to have a fleet of starships, and they will be able to do multiple landing attempts in 2026 and 2029, and they'll be able to update their, from telemetry, update the landing software, so that even within a single Earth-Moon window, they'll have multiple different attempts at landing. And I think that by the end of 2029, I think that they will have a pretty decent chance of figuring out how to, land on Mars. And so I would put 2031, maybe 2033, as being a time in which we could see people on Mars. And so that's not much later than the cargo and then the crew landings on the moon. So I really see settlement as being either moon or Mars, and not too distant in the future. Now, the Mars settlement, I think, is going to follow a very similar route to lunar settlement in terms of very large inflatables being the logical first thing to do. It's just so much easier to build it and launch it than to try to build up an industry and try to get the safety of things that you construct in situ. I think for several years, it's just going to be easier just to ship the large inflatables. Okay, so oops, I'm going the wrong direction. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about the Instabase, which is one of the two focuses of this hour. And the Instabase on the moon, our design, and you know, this is just a conceptual thing, but it's basically focused around the idea of what is necessary to support an initial permanent crew of 8 people. And so we have 10 different modules, the bed hab, bath hab, the living hab, what we call a bubble hab, but this is an extension out where you can walk outdoors, but you're still indoors. But it's a clear clear bubble that you can walk outdoors in your pajamas, let's say, and you don't have to suit up every time to go outdoors. You could be standing out there thinking that, wow, it's almost like I'm standing on the surface of the moon or Mars. The arts hab for fine arts and performing arts and the other arts, and then the work hab with different wings, which I'll explain. A tower, which is just a lookout tower, is just an aesthetic feature where people can go up to the top and be able to look out and see as the vehicles are landing in the distance and that sort of thing. 2 green habs. This is by far and away the largest volume of the Instabase are these 2 green habs, specifically sized to meet all of the nutritional needs of an initial permanent crew of 8. And this is based on the prototype lunar greenhouse work done at University of Arizona, Tucson. And then actually a spin hab. And I might get a little bit into that, but if you go to, well, I'll show you there. I've got some links to where we discuss that. But spin hab is going to be important for extending crew stay, as well as being able to do animal studies to get to the artificial gravity prescription for healthy gestation and childhood. Okay, and an outdoor metallurgy area that would be telerobotically controlled. So we have thought a little bit about what are some of the things within each of these habitats. And what we did in the full-scale mock-up that we created, we actually put 1/2-inch white tape, and we actually laid out this blueprint. So as you go through, you can actually see, like, for example, the bed hab, 4 bedrooms for the initial permanent crew of 8. And you know, you'd have like queen-size bed and end tables and dressers and whatnot within each of these things. Here's the bath hab. The arts hab would serve both for arts, but also as a fitness center that could also be moved in and out as for example, dance is being done there. And some of the utilities are actually in our concept are under the ground, although they could be in some of these spaces outside, but connected to the habs. The work hab would have these 4 wings. And for example, the machining, this is the largest of the wings, the machining area, the chem there on the right, the chemistry lab, organic and inorganic chemistry, and then on the left hand, the bio, the geo areas. This is where working with some of the animals that are being used in the study in the centrifuge, and then a robotics area, because if you can create the bulky parts of telerobots from lunar, from the 1% unoxidized metal in the lunar highlands, then you can just ship the very low mass electronics, and you could get on essentially an exponential growth curve where the crew are making these parts and assembling them, you know, pulling together what's shipped and what you've made. And then those robots can be operated 24/7 by people on Earth. And those robots can go out and harvest more metals, go ahead and, you know, do the metallurgy part and be doing a lot of this stuff 24/7, so that you have an exponentially growing telerobotic workforce. And I imagine at every scale of development and settlement, we're probably going to have many more telerobots on the moon than crew, actually, or residents, I should say. And then on Mars, our belief is that you can't really do telerobotics on Mars because of the time delay from Earth, and you don't want to be consuming crew time on Mars. And so, but we do believe that AI or machine learning is probably going to be up to what's necessary by the time that it's needed on Mars. This is don't make too much of this, but this is just sort of a conceptual idea about, some sections will be larger, some smaller in the green hab. However, this is not representative because in the green habs it would be 3D growth. And if any of you are in our space development network, we have an agricultural working group, and we have a document which we call our consensus plan that amongst us, and this is some of the leading, space advocates who about agriculture. They're the ones who participated in this. So I think it's a good quality document that's well thought through. And so if you go to developspace.info/consensus, you can download that document and look it over and see the choices that we made. A key thing was we feel as though both on the moon and Mars, you need sufficient shielding. On Mars, not so much for the plants, but for the crew who are going to be working in there. And once you really shield it sufficiently, then you're blocking the sunlight, and therefore you need to go ahead and do other wires and LEDs connected to on the moon, the solar drapes, or light tubing or fiber optics approach, somehow getting the light within. And then you can be growing in a 3D environment. If you just have a transparent green hab, then you can really only grow in 2D. And so we feel that honestly, using almost the 24/7 power at the peaks of eternal light at the moon, you can have some areas that will get in sunlights and other areas are having nighttime. And so you can simulate the diurnal pattern there. Anyhow, there's more to it. But again, this is based on the work done at the prototype lunar greenhouse at the University of Arizona, Tucson. The spin hab is really quite interesting. It's my belief, based on some data, rat studies where you suspend the tail to offload to Mars forces on the hind legs, that we are going to need additional artificial gravity. 1/6 and 3/8 is not sufficient for long-term health. And I feel like almost our contribution, because not too many people are talking about this, but you can get up to a full G so long as you're doing sedentary activities where you're not turning your head. If you don't turn your head, you don't have Coriolis effects. That's physics. And so our idea is to maybe not have these small chambers as an earlier idea, but an entire ring, and having an area that can go in and you can be doing this sort of your screen time sedentary activities, which, for example, we're all doing right now, and which we spend many hours a day doing anyhow. Very low mass, probably carbon fiber tubes and chambers, but you got to really anchor that axis down quite well. Okay, so that is a sort of an overview of the Instabase. The second part of this presentation is about the Space Fair, and we didn't realize that we were developing a space fair. We thought it was just the Instabase mock-up. But after we got done, it took us about 18 months to get done with that thing. After we got done, Starship launch is being delayed so much, we were like, well, what do we do with the time? And so we just started creating some of these exhibits. And we had like about 6 months to work on the exhibits. And we ended up developing a whole bunch of exhibits. And so we realized that we were turning this into sort of an educational science fair that's space-oriented, or what we call the Space Fair. So this is a picture from ISDC at Frisco, Texas. And what we did is we did transport out our mock-up of the Instabase there. This is actually not the whole Instabase. Our Instabase is a little bit bigger than what the room could handle. But then you see these tables, and we have these categories. We have the different exhibits there. And what it is going from left to right, there's these categories, and with the exhibits related to that category. So if you start in the far left dealing with rockets and just keep working your way, it's in order about space development and the different categories. And we worked with some of the education people at the National Space Society, and we're glad that they were able to use our Instabase mockups as a location where they could be working with students from all around the world, and they got these really big maps and conducted the activities inside, and so it was a neat symbiotic relationship with them. I'm glad to be able to partner with them. We would have sort of, I don't say guided tours, but basically going through and explaining the different parts of the Space Fair. You could walk through and actually read signs. We had about, I don't know, 30 signs. And so you could pretty much learn what all the different aspects of space development are. But I think it's a lot more engaging to actually have somebody there to be able to go through and explain point by point. There's several of us that did that at different times. And like, for example, this group is mostly a Romanian group. And boy, smart kids asking a lot of really good questions, and they seemed absolutely engaged in the exhibits. So let me just run through systematically some of the exhibits. You see there the different categories. And under the rocket section, and these are, concepts. You could have a landing tarp where you have the center has in the tarp you have some ceramics, so you can land directly on that, and then you have a tarp that can't really handle the heat, but it simply separates the thrust away from the regolith, and then there's a berm so that as the Starship lands, the exhaust is basically going up and is not interacting directly with the regolith. So this is, don't know if this is the best idea out there, but it is an idea to help with the dust issue. You put that something like 2 kilometers away, have a regional spaceport serving part of the South Pole, for example, of the moon, then that's could be a way of addressing that issue. We did create a mock-up of a grid fin, and honestly, we're toying with the idea of making a full-scale Starship grid fin, which would be rather impressive. But we'll see if we actually do that. And again, we had 25 or so of these posters where people could just go through and very quickly understand what it is that's being displayed. We did have a scale model. I don't have a picture of it here, but of the solar drapes, and these things would be about 60 meters high. And in 1/6 gravity, if you think about it, 60 meters is not really a problem. And then these drapes would track the sun and get, except for self-shading, really get quite a bit of power throughout most of the time. We did, on the right-hand side, we did create a mock-up of a dexterous telerobot. Would absolutely love to partner with some of these universities that do the rover challenges and say, hey, given the criteria, would you be interested in developing and lending to us a dexterous telerobot that when people visit the exhibit, they could be able to put on a virtual reality headset and gloves and data gloves and being able to do the telerobotic operations. That'd be the ultimate, But anyhow, we started with PVC pipes and tried to do the best that we could with the time and relatively low expertise. Here's a 3D printed mock-up of the scale model of the ice harvester concept. And don't forget, aluminum doesn't get brittle at cryogenic temperatures. The external tank on the space shuttle was aluminum, and it had hydrogen. It was holding hydrogen. It's way down there, almost to absolute zero. Concept for vehicles of taking your shielding with you, but having flat screens on the inside and cameras on the outside, so wherever you drive, you can see through the windows, in a sense. They're virtual windows. Would love to actually, at some point in the future, maybe when we establish our Moon Mars analog base, to actually have, sort of your, what's it called, your clubs at universities that they work with vehicles, and to actually have a vehicle where you have a computer and it knows the orientation, it's generating a virtual moon or Mars environment. So when you're inside, you're driving around, it looks like you're driving on Mars. You know, that would be pretty cool. For the habitat section, we have created this illustration of the 5 different layers of the inflatable habitats. We didn't really get a chance to give tours at ISDC at Frisco because they're being used by the education people, but in the future, we'd like to be able to let people go inside and get the tour on the inside. I think they'd really enjoy that. Just illustration of the issue with artificial gravity and how we just don't weigh very much on the moon and Mars. And then in the cruise section, we've made a mock-up of a telepresent device there on the left. And we have one fellow that's getting us, looks like he's going to be able to get the software not working, so that one person at the exhibit can be on a laptop computer and the other can be looking at a tablet on that telepresence device. And we have programmed in the 2.6 second time delay to be able to see what it's like to be on the moon, but still telepresent on Earth. Why is that so important? Telepresence, this is sort of critical probably, and that is the private settlers are probably going to be older because it takes a part of your life to save up enough money. Okay, so there's going to be a strong bias. Millionaires are strongly biased to older age. And what do grandmothers want to do? They want to be kept in contact with their grandkids, right? And that's going to be an issue in going to Mars. You can't be telepresent at graduations, at marriages, at Thanksgiving, but on the moon you can. And so frankly, that is probably a deciding factor for a certain percentage of potential settlers. And so in our exhibits, we'd like to illustrate that. In fact, you can carry on a reasonable conversation even with the 2.6 second time delay. I look forward to when we get that exhibit working. Radiation shielding. 5 of you actually sent in questions that related to radiation, and this is our solution. Again, it's the best solution that we can come up with right now, but we're not confident that there's not a better solution yet. But our idea is with inflatables, you have 2 layers. In the top layer, you actually have a hole that's suspended by sort of a springy structure to keep it off the lower layer. You inflate the lower layer at like 1 atmosphere pressure, so it's rigid, 10 tons per square meter for outward force. And then what you do is you use one of these conveyor belts that they use in mining, and you put regolith on top, it goes up and it simply drops in the hole, and it slides down and just fills the inside. Now on Mars, you don't even do that. You just, you should locate it where there's a glacier down below and do a rod well where you heat and you have this increasingly large vacuole. You're sucking up water and you just fill the space in between. So you don't even need the hole at the top. This is like just one of the simplest ways. I mean, I think if you 3D print bricks, you're going to be spending like a lot of energy, a lot of time, or shipping binder or something like this. And why consolidate the shielding when you can just pour it? So this is our thinking on that point. In the resource section, we have resources, balls and 2-liter bottles of different sizes representing the composition. And then what would it take to be able to create breathable air? We discussed that. This is fascinating. The L-Cross results in 2009 showed 5.6 or 5.7% of the regolith in Cabeza's crater is icy, is water ice. But not only that, if you look at it by volume, not by mass, but by volume, this is what the organics would look like. So it's like cometary material that's in there. And you can, if you were to go to our website and look at this, that green, that's ammonia. That's your source of nitrogen. And those other smaller things, most of those are actually carbon-containing compounds. So, and if you recycle, there's not going to be a shortage of volatiles, or including organics, including carbon and nitrogen, for a very large settlement that recycles. We do have regolith simulant. Mortar was what we used for the lunar regolith simulant. We have one fellow, we didn't have it at Frisco, but one guy is actually 3D printing an actual meteorite on Mars of the right size, and then we'll be painting it to look like it's metallic. And with the idea that those rovers in about 50 to 60 kilometers have found 50 to 60 nickel iron meteorites just sitting on the surface. You and I have walked the earth our entire lives and never tripped across one of these probably. And yet these rovers are just finding these unoxidized metals, these beautiful chunks of metal that could be a good starting metal for a lunar base. So we want to illustrate that concept. Looking to the future, we want to expand our exhibits. The NorCal Mars Society of Northern California, they actually lent us one of their suits that we had there at Frisco, but we'd also like to be able to work with costume people to create some really, really cool spacesuit mock-ups, such as that one on the right. We have another fellow who's working to try to illustrate some of the metallurgy processes. 3D printer has its place. I just don't know about 3D printing habitats. It seems like a lot of energy and time and whatnot. But and then on the mining side, you know, if the moon doesn't have ore bodies, well, we can make our own through the process of beneficiation. So it'd be nice to be able to have a little tabletop exhibit showing, you know, magnetic separation or some sort of beneficiation process. Indoor tours, as I mentioned before, this would be the ultimate reduced gravity simulator. Not quite sure. That's just an idea that it's out there right now. But if any of you are sort of mechanical engineers, hey, let's talk. That would be great if it can be done safely. And then one of our agriculture people, he has stated that he's committed to developing a desktop hydroponic little garden that would be growing one of each of the major categories of food, and then we could have a plate showing a meal in which it has, you know, a legume. It has salads and a legumes and protein and whatnot. So let me wrap this up by telling you about the Space Development Network. We have about 170 members in it. We are really wanting to be a sort of an adjunct to all of the other space advocacy organizations, including the National Space Society, in that we want to be able to sort of be the coordinators and organizers and promoters of projects that space advocates can get involved with. I think many of the space advocacy organizations, they want to do projects, but maybe there's frustration with not doing so much. And so what we'd like to do is sort of take that issue and be very organized. What we do is we, through the Space Development Network and through our website, we have the working groups there. And basically the concept of the working groups is to bring, when people join the Space Development Network, they specify what their interests are and what their talents are. And then based upon their interest, when we have a Zoom working group on a particular topic, we email only those people who've expressed an interest on that topic and say, if you're free, we're meeting by Zoom at this time. And so people join together and are being led by you know, somebody appointed to lead the group to try to be effective and productive and to make real progress. And so if you would like to be involved with that, it's you know, join for free by going to developspace.info and finding where it says click to join, and then tell us what your interests are, and we can get back with you on that. Okay, so there were some submitted questions. I don't know if Bert, were there some additional questions that came in from the ones?
Yeah, there are quite a few questions that came in. So why don't we take the ones that were submitted when people registered first, and then we'll talk about the ones that just came in.
So 5 of you asked questions about radiation, and basically you use dumb math to protect against radiation. And I explained to you about how we would go ahead and have double walls and be able to pour the regolith in between. Okay. 3 of you had funding questions. This can be, it can be sort of contentious. It can be frustrating, frankly, in my opinion, because this is just my opinion here. I don't think it's all based on resources. I don't think we're going to like have mining being the thing that pays for settlement. Okay, I don't think helium-3. I think concentration is too small. Platinum group metals on the moon are equivocal, rather equivocal. We don't know. Space-based solar power from the moon is pretty far out there. Now, the one thing, propellant. This is, I think there's general agreement that the first thing that's going to turn a profit would be propellant. But I'm sorry, normally propellant is thought about, you harvest the ice, you ship it up to something like, I don't know, EML 1 or 2 or something like this, and you sell it to who? SpaceX? Is SpaceX really even offering to buy propellant? They're just loading up on Earth and shifting it over in low Earth orbit. I'm not even convinced about propellant from the moon. I think propellant can reduce the cost of accessing the moon. I just don't know about selling it to outsiders on Mars. So I'm myself not too keen on resources. Resources can reduce cost, but I don't see that there's big profit maker personally. Rather, I think that the thing that is going to fund it is international space budgets initially. Very important. If the per seat price can get down low enough, I think a lot of countries are going to be glad to pay for those seats. But then also personal savings, and I would point to Sun City, and they don't mind that this is a retirement community, like for example Northwest Phoenix. They don't mind. They don't do inventors colony. They don't. They're retired, and yet how can Sun City maintain itself, sustain itself, and grow is through personal savings. And I think that that's for many decades, I think that's the way we're going to fund it. So that's my personal answer to those questions. There's 3 questions about international. If you go to the website developedspace.info has many answers to, we've tried to think about almost every dimension of near and midterm space development. So go to developedspace.info and go to developedspace.property to deal with, and also go to our policy page /policy. Yes, we are proposing a very large international lunar exploration phase and Mars exploration phase. And we believe that that will transition to international bases on the moon and Mars. And then what changes the international laws and treaties? In my opinion, we don't need to change it. Nobody is going to be stopping anybody from using resources for their own use. And then the 18th Sustainable Development Goals for COPUOS. My apologies, I don't think that's a productive path. I think sort of the Artemis Accords and just with SpaceX, I think moving forward and establishing facts on the ground is all that's necessary for space development and settlement. That's my opinion. I'm not convinced international organizations are efficient in making progress. But anyhow, life support, there's a couple of questions about air pressure and carbon dioxide. In my mind, we deal with that on the ISS, and yes, we'll deal with that in any base, scrubbing out CO2. Does your vision make life support modular and easily transferable from one habit to another? Very interesting. I hadn't really thought it through. I presume that life support will be centralized and then it'll be transported through ducting, and that would need to be connected, through the modules. So yeah, probably we need to think about that a little bit more. So I appreciate that question. I'm very curious to hear Dr. Plata's thought about how lunar and Martian dust mitigation can be handled. These are now getting into answers or questions that have already been answered on the website. So if you go to developedspace.info/dust, we deal with just about every category of where dust is a problem. But to summarize my answer, we want to avoid dust at all possibility. We don't go out and don't be jumping around in dust. Don't be tracking it in. There are ways of keeping it off the suit and away, out of the hab. And when we're in the green hab, we just take in rocks and crush them down to the right granular size, and we don't deal with this abrasive regolith. We just do not deal with it. Check it out. There, it just describes it. A short, long-term physiological concerns of habitation, what would they be? I appreciate this question. I think that really the hypogravity, the reduced gravity is probably going to be the biggest physiologic challenge of them all. I think we can get rid of the radiation issue, but I got to tell you, I think, you know, we are proposing the best solution that we can figure out. Indoor centrifuge. If you check out the artificial gravity page and the artificial gravity prescription page, you'll see some of the ways that we've dealt with it. Look into the question of the hydrostatic pressure distribution throughout the body and think about how many hours do we stand upright, how many hours do we lay down, what's the hydrostatic column as you're laying down on Moon and Mars compared with Earth. There's not that much difference. So sleeping in a centrifuge probably is not going to make that much a difference. But standing upright has health effects, and I think that's going to be relevant to when we move beyond Earth. Where will Instabase be built? It's not going to be built off Earth. It's going to be built on Earth and then packaged and launched. It's just the cheapest, safest way of doing it, and the launch prices are coming down pretty dramatically. So if you go to those pages, you'll see about our description about how it would be set up, how it'd be inflated on the Moon and Mars, and how it'd be sort of anchored in the ground to get sort of flat surface. How long is the transition from bringing a pressure vessel to constructing a pressure vessel using local material? It's not going to be near term, just because large inflatables are just so relatively easy. But what you're talking about is really becoming self-reliant, increasing levels of full self-reliance all the way to full self-reliance. And so if you go to developspace.info/independence, we've done a lot of thinking about the different aspects of achieving full self-reliance, which is one of the goals for space settlement. I want to know all your plans for Mars. Well, please go to developspace.info/Mars. How will the necessary materials be transmitted to locations, whether it be United States or other nations? Basically, Starship. That's how it'd be transported from Earth to the Moon and Mars. And then a real solid one to address space debris now and the future. If you go to our website, and these are redirects to the right place in our website, developspace.info/debris. My opinion, I think debris is a greater concern than it should be. The non-intentional collisions are pretty rare. The constellations that we're putting up are active. They can avoid, which means their risk of collision is much lower than what was put up before. And we're not going to be stopped from passing through LEO or even being in LEO. That's not going to happen for probably forever. I think we don't need to solve the debris problem. It's not an urgent problem, in my opinion. Sorry about that. I know many of you disagree with that, but that's my view. How to build floors, walls, plumbing, toilets, coolers, etc. Lines in inflatable habitat modules. I'm sort of guessing what you're asking here is if you fold up a module to launch it, when you inflate it, how do you do all these wires and tubing, etc.? It's a fair question. Probably wires you could probably fold, but the tubing, some of the stuff is going to be, the sanitation section is going to be located with the bathrooms, so there could be not a great deal of distance, but basically there will need to be some connecting, some assembling, some putting into mount, brackets, mounting equipment. So that's how you can have rigid stuff that is even moved in through an airlock after the flexible inflatable stuff has been inflated. So that's an interesting question. After establishing moon base and Mars base, will there be a possibility of human travel in the far future to Jupiter? Look at what SpaceX, look at what Elon has talked about. I think it was in his Guadalajara speech. And that is, if you can use a Starship to transport propellant out at distance and keep it cooled, then you can send people in an empty Starship out to that distance, dock, refuel it, and go even further. And as I look at it, I don't think Mars is the stopping point. I think we could see people out to Ceres and even Jupiter. Saturn's a bigger problem, actually, but I could imagine within my lifetime people actually going to the moons of Jupiter. How was Sustainable Space Development Plan developed, and what was the expertise of the group doing this? It was developed based on principles of near-term, most probable, looking at a variety of different options and choosing what we think is the best option. Our expertise is space advocate level expertise, and that can range, but we really rely on the smartest of the experts to help us figure out solutions to the challenges of space development and settlement. Do you have alternate plans if these do prove viable? I presume they don't prove viable. Basically, because we have tried to create the sort of the most logical from an efficiency standpoint and from a probability standpoint, we're really trying to articulate the best plan we can possibly come up with. So what we're doing is we're just trying to promote our plan, which is a challenge because we're not a billionaire, so people don't retweet everything that we say, and we're not able to hire people. You know, the decision makers in DC sort of have their own ideas of what they want to do, which is not near-term private settlement. And so we are basically, what we want to do is establish a Moon-Mars analog base in Boca Chica. We want to be able to set up a higher quality Instabase and be able to use it as a new type of analog base that's development oriented, not exploration oriented. And we want to do things like summer sessions for agricultural work sessions, et cetera. But all of that is going to take property, it's going to take, you know, funding, and although much of it could be done volunteer, but ultimately we'd like to see if a billionaire would like to have their contribution be to help develop surface systems. So that's our network. This is our goal. Boy, Bert, I feel like we are going long here. Do you want me to finish up? It's just
yeah, because we do have it's almost 10 minutes after 10. We do got quite a few questions that were submitted, so I think you've done a great job with these. Why don't you take a couple more, and then we'll take some of the ones that were submitted during the session.
Well, I tell you what, let me just pass and conclude, because there's probably some really good ones that you've seen come up.
There we go. Okay, if you let's see, just stop sharing. I think we'll go from there.
I got to say, we still have 43 people, so I really appreciate you all. And let me look at the chat and see if there's
some in the chat. There's some that are in the Q&A. So yeah, if you could stop sharing first.
Okay, sorry.
Yep, that way. There we go. That way we can get your there. Perfect.
Okay.
So let's see. Yep, quite a few in Q&A. I think some you have addressed already. But there's one about, you talked about radiation protection. How about protecting against meteors?
You know, shielding, regular shielding is going to protect against micrometeorites, which are the main issue.
Right. Is it a good idea to move quickly into an underground habitat?
No, bad idea. Sorry. I know that's very popular, but lavitudes are not where they need to be initially. They are not close to peaks of eternal light. They're not close to the volatiles. And so, yes, lava tubes will have a future, but we've got to establish a foothold for a number of years at the poles first, in my opinion. Look, you can pile up enough regoliths to provide sufficient shielding. Lava tubes are not absolutely essential.
Right. Okay, let me
Yeah.
just see. I see a couple more about radiation protection. You did mention about artificial intelligence and how could inclusion of AI assist settlements?
Automated robots, in my opinion. I mean, we want to offload as much of the workload from the residents, crew and residents as possible, and AI most definitely fits into that.
Very good. You mentioned radiation protection already. I see a question there about the government structure, but with a small group, it's not really a government. It's more of a leadership hierarchy, right?
Oh, no, that's really interesting.
Yeah,
I'm just guessing that there's going to be a ISS type of agreement in an international base, but as Japanese businessmen who are too old and they don't want to learn English, as you build up a Japanese population, eventually they're going to say, why don't we just start our own, use the proven technology and start their own little colony. And I think there's going to be self-governance going on
okay,
on the moon and Mars.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've always had lots of questions about that in previous discussions about settlements. So it's an interesting topic.
I think dictatorial countries on Earth are not going to fare very well when they don't have a trapped population. And who's going to choose to go to the dictatorial, lunar
Right.
colony? I think we're going to do quite fine.
Very good. Another question about the first settlers being selected on the basis of diversity, inclusion, and equity.
Well, I'd say certainly diversity. I don't know about equity, but inclusion certainly. I think that the initial permanent crew should be very diverse, and their backgrounds. I mean, although it'll probably be a public-private program with a lot of NASA funding, is my hope. And so these are Americans, but Americans can be naturalized citizens from anywhere. And so we could have excellent diversity. And I think that would be a high priority.
Right. You did mention this, the person actually came in a little bit late. Speaking of your initial permanent crew, about how comfortable are you with the long-term living in 1/6 gravity? You kind of mentioned that's long-term isn't going to work.
Okay, yeah. Check out our. I put several links up there on one of the pages. Developspace.info/centrifuge AG for artificial gravity and AGRX, and that addresses it. Please look into the work that we've done on that. But what I would say is that with the AGRX, that page, we actually show a protocol for achieving the artificial gravity prescription for healthy gestation and childhood in the fastest possible way. And frankly, we need to get that answer very fast, because in about 2035, you'll have enough people on trans-Mars injection or on the surface of Mars. And if they get pregnant, it's either abortion or it is taking it to term, and you're not going to get back to Earth in time. In orbit, a pregnancy, you just come back. On the moon, 3 days later, you're back. So I think that we need the artificial gravity prescription in about 2035. And I'm telling you, it's rather urgent, because that's a nightmare, in my opinion.
Follow on to that question. The person was asking, do you know the work of Peter Koch, K-O-K-H?
Yes. What's his Moon Miners Manifesto? Yeah. Now, there's some good stuff there, but he was working in previous decades that didn't have as much knowledge of the resources that there are in the moon.
Right. Let me just go down a few others that I think are more appropriate. What type of energy would be used to provide power?
Solar power initially, and then as you get away from the poles, we do need nuclear power. But the high energy stuff could be done at the poles, and it could be transported overland on self-driving vehicles to the equatorial areas. On Mars, you can just double up your solar panels and get the same amount of power. But we do need to go fission as soon as we can.
Right. We're getting a lot, Doug. If it's okay to go a little bit longer,
Yeah, I'm great.
Great, great. Let me get a few of the others that are kind of technical. What would the air pressure be in the HABs?
In my opinion, 0.5 with 30% O2.
Okay, great. Let me just scroll down a little bit more. One good comment there about your Instabase serving as a great template to promote education throughout the country. So that sounds great.
Hey, I got one I really want to answer.
Oh,
Will
go
there
ahead,
be
go
any
ahead.
pets? Will
Which
there be
one?
any pets? If so, what kind?
Oh.
So in the scenario that we lay out, we have initial crew of 8, but we have a crew of 9, and one of those is a female dog. Okay, and then we ship it if it's mates later, and guess what? Moon puppies.
Moon puppies. Okay.
And also during the international lunar phase, as these countries, their schools, they shut down studying, and they're watching their national astronaut heroes, landing on the moon and on Mars and exploring. And I imagine that when they land, what it is they can bring the things that are unique to themselves. This gets to the diversity sort of things. They can bring food, unique food, from their country, but also animals, and contribute it to a lunar zoo. And there could be really fascinating animals that could be brought to the moon and Mars.
Right. Let me take the last one from the Q&A, and then we'll just switch over to the chat and try to get a few others in. So I think you also mentioned this a little bit. How level must the surface below the Instabase be? How large a level area is required for the Instabase and necessary for landing and takeoff areas? And will such locations be available in the desired polar locations?
Okay, I'm sorry. Is that all one question from the chat?
It was all one question. Yeah.
I don't see that question. It was a long one.
It's in the Q&A. It's down toward the bottom. And this comes from
I'm sorry, Jeffrey Liss. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm not sure about the level of the surface. It does need our guesstimate is about 100 feet by 170 feet would be the footprint. And we are identifying places at what we call the peak of eternal light A2. It's near a 1 kilometer crater. It's on the rim of Shackleton crater at about the 830 position, if for those who understand. It looks like there's an area that could be flat enough. It probably need to be flattened a little bit more, and then sort of raked out of the rocks telerobotically, and then using a steamroller, electric vibrating steamroller to compact it down flat, and then just laser, not cut. I mean, use laser to get it incredibly flat and compacted, so that. And the question is can you just use that as your foundation? Compaction, is that sufficient? I'm not sure why not, but on Earth we always want a really good rock to be on, and so to me that's something I need help from from an engineer on that. Let's see.
Quick question for you. You mentioned that in terms of the team that's working with you as part of this. I assume they come from all walks of life, and maybe they're not necessarily space professionals, but they still have certain expertise.
Yeah, in our space development network, we recognize that different people are at different levels. I mean, our youngest member is 7 years old. He was at the launch of Starship, and he came up to me, and he was excited, and he brought 3 of his relatives in that are now members as well. And what can a 7-year-old do? He can draw,
Right.
So that can be his contribution. But then we have some people who are aerospace engineers, and they're doing some amazing CAD work for us, and everybody contributes at the level that they can. And frankly, for any of you listening, if you would like to join us, you don't feel like have too low of a qualification. If you know how to retweet, well, that's helpful. Yeah.
That is really fabulous. I love that 7-year-old is contributing. So great. Let's see if we can get a few others in before we run out of time. I see one there about with the spin hab. Would you have to account for the weight imbalance of the crew equipment in each module? And how would you do that? I don't know if you've addressed that.
Yeah, we've addressed it, and that is obviously that is a problem. But what you do is along the trusses you have weights that can adjust to counterbalance it. And you probably, when you start spinning up, slowly, and you see what, this is sort of like the washing machine sort of problem.
Right.
You want a system to counterbalance it, and it should be able to be done. This is a solved problem.
Let's see, Will, you showed a good idea of the different skill sets here. This one talks about, well, you need a tactical officers like defense and disaster recovery, a disaster recovery plan.
Yeah, you certainly need, you need probably a constantly fueled up vehicle that can do suborbital hops as well as returning to Earth, at least from the moon quickly. So you do need that. I do see, should the Space Force be somehow involved? My personal opinion is no. I think we can do everything on the moon and Mars without involving the Space Force and making other nations nervous about what America's intentions are. And would here's Carl Bricko.
Yeah.
Would the habitats be able to withstand the winds on Mars? Well, I watched The Martian, so I'm very concerned about that one.
But very good.
but the answer is yes, because the forces of 0.6% air is not much force.
Right. Let's see. Let me just see any others that we've got, because we're already at 22 minutes after. So I see Mackenzie's been posting a lot of links, so that's great for some of your information there. And I'll go one more time up there. I saw a comment there about skills will be the most important, and for those on the being able to do the work that you have to do on when you're on the moon.
I'm sorry, I was reading while you're talking. Were you?
Oh, that's okay. No, I just saw a comment there. One of the things about skills, ability, and knowledge will matter in terms of the inhabitants, and then it just say DEI is important, but that could come after.
Well, no, diversity we should include from the very beginning. Yep. I think.
Okay.
My opinion, I think I believe in equality before the law, equity, making everybody equal outcomes. I don't want to take our conflicts with us, and a philosophy that's based on classes against each other. I don't want to take that with us personally.
Now, on that positive note, why don't we make that the last comment question? So let me close this out. So Doug, thank you so much. That was a really interesting presentation. And I also loved how you incorporated a lot of the questions that people had submitted into the end of the presentation. So we covered quite a bit of ground, and really appreciate what you and your team have been doing. Very interesting. So thank you so much for being part of today's Space Forum.
All right, my pleasure.
Okay, so I just want to thank, before we sign off, I want to thank my colleagues, Larry Ahern and Fred Becker, for all the work they do in support of these space forums. And I will share my screen one last time so that I can close things out, everybody. Okay, and here we go. So thanks again, Doug. We really appreciate it. Let's cancel that. There we go. And I just need to advance my screen if it goes forward. There we go. So as always, everybody, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules for attending today's Space Forum. We really appreciate it. We definitely want to see you again next week for our senior leadership town hall and open house. So hopefully you can join us. And as always, for those in our current time zones, have a great evening. For those in tomorrow's time zones, have a great day. And of course, the weekend is coming up, so have a great weekend. So everybody stay safe. We thank you so much for attending, and we'll see you again next week at the town hall. Take care, everybody. And I'm going to stop my share here. And Fred, you can turn off the recording.